Final hour of OverDrive for the week. Big Easter Friday. Tomorrow.
I think it's
It's
called
that holiday.
Good Friday.
Oh,
that's okay.
Easter Monday. Yes, you're right. My Judaism shining through there, Dave.
It's okay.
Lack of knowledge about certain holidays. I know Passover,
Maybe
though.
it's not so good for you.
Yeah.
It could be a great Friday.
Yes, hour 3 of the show. Aaron Korolnek, Dave Feschuk in for Brian, Jamie, and Jeff. OverDrive is brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Pierre LeBrun will call in about 5 minutes, and I'm going to read you Pierre's tweet from yesterday, Dave. My opinion, this is the most playoff-ready Maple Leafs team in the Matthews-Marner era, but the Senators are playing with house money. You could talk me into so many plausible scenarios with this series. The guys on OverDrive have 3 shows this week to stress over it. Really just 2. But in any case, a lot of stress.
LeBrun really out on a limb there.
Yeah, exactly.
These guys are good, but so are these guys.
Yeah, you got to hedge your bets. Hedge your bets, to use FanDuel parlance. But there is still one game to play before Game 1. Game 82 has to be played tonight. It's on TSN 4. The Toronto Maple Leafs, you'd think, would be rolling out a lineup of Alex Steeves and Kyle Clifford coming up and all types of AHL guys. That is not the case. In fact, the Maple Leafs will be using the exact same lineup that they used on Tuesday when they clinched the Atlantic Division against the Buffalo Sabres. The only change is that Joseph Wall will start in net and not Anthony Stolarz. And you may be wondering why that is the case. The answer is the salary cap. And the Maple Leafs don't have any other choice but to dress the guys they have, because Jake McCabe, probably don't want to play him. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, David Kampf, those 3 guys, according to Craig Berube, fairly confident they will be ready for Game 1 on Sunday. So that's the good news. The bad news is the Leafs have to ensure, or do their best to do so, that they don't get any injuries tonight, because the last thing you want if you're Toronto is to have a Jason Robertson situation in Dallas where he's walking out of that rink last night with his knee in a brace. You got to find a way to emerge unscathed. If you're the Maple Leafs, you have 60 minutes to go before the Stanley Cup playoffs begin. And I don't care if you're flamingoing in front of every shot that comes your way. No one's blocking shots. No one's taking any unnecessary contact. Get through it in a healthy fashion and get ready for Ottawa Sunday night at 7 p.m.
I got news for you. Chris Tanev will block some shots.
I really hope not.
That's just who he is. I mean, I like, we've discussed this so many times with different coaches and GMs over the years. Like, how do you approach a meaningless game before a playoff run? And I mean, the overriding kind of sense that I've always gotten is most people just believe you just got to go out and play. Like, you can't, if you start thinking, we cannot get hurt tonight, fellas. Like, if your pep talk is,
you're right,
stay healthy, what do you think is going to happen? You know, like, it's not going to go well. You can't, like, it's not like you can just play hockey sort of halfway.
So Max Domi's playing, or he's starting on a line with John Tavares and William Nylander tonight. Do you think that he starts Game 1 on that line as well?
He hasn't been the primary winger on that line for most of the season, right? That's been
Bobby McMahon.
A lot of Bobby McMahon's job. I think Matt Pacioretty's been there occasionally. Pacioretty's the interesting one for me here because Craig Berube loves him. And as O-Dog was saying before he headed off to the panel, like, Pacioretty brought something that they don't have in quantity, which is a physical presence, like a missile out there that can really destroy people. And to top that off, he's got hands, right? Like, Max Pacioretty can score goals. He's proven that. Even at age 36, even coming off a couple of Achilles. So, Game 1, if we're going to see Pacioretty, where do you think he slots? That might be his most likely spot. Now, is he going to play the full contingent of minutes? Probably not. So I could see them rotating Pacioretty onto that line for a while, bring back Domi. Like, I think it's going to be fluid.
Well, I would definitely keep Scott Lawton, Steven Lorentz, and Calle Yarncroke together, because they've looked really good since they've been put together the last 3 games. And whether you call them the 3rd line or the 4th line, it doesn't really matter, because, again, those are just labels. But as far as guys like Nick Robertson, Pontus Holmberg, I mean, I don't know. If Pacioretty's ready to return and David Kampf is ready to return, I think those guys could very well be the odd men out. And I don't think that's necessarily deserved. I think Nick Robertson has shown a lot here over the last month or so since he's been given that opportunity, since he returned from that healthy scratch. I guess I think 3 straight healthy scratches and scored a bunch of goals, playing with a little bit of an edge. And I'd like to see him get an opportunity, but again, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was Max Pacioretty who slides back in, because the way that Berube has talked about it, it leads you to believe that that is the most likely outcome.
Yeah, and I also think, like, Bobby McMahon to me is the guy they need there. Like, he brings something that Domi doesn't, and that is a bigger body. And there's going to be a lot of talk about matching Ottawa's physicality with physicality and wearing that D down with a great forecheck. And Berube is all about the forecheck. Now, McMahon hasn't exactly been a model forechecker at times, and I think that's part of the reason why he hasn't, been a staple on that line. But because he can obviously score and he can obviously skate, and he can fly. He's one of the better skaters on the team. But yeah, I mean, he's right there too. It'll be interesting to see. I think my instinct with Berube is, if Pacioretty's an option, he's going to want to use him in a pretty prominent way. Now, if that's realistic at age 36 is another question. Again,
would you rather have Pacioretty, who hasn't played in 3 months, in your lineup, or Nick Robertson, who's been in there every night? I think that's the question that Craig Berube may very well be wrestling with here ahead of Sunday.
Well, Pacioretty, again, brings something that Nick Robertson can never bring, right? Nick Robertson's not hitting anybody. And Nick Robertson does have a bad habit of taking dumb penalties.
That is true.
And so does Max Domi. So those two bad penalties are one of the things. You talk about the Leafs beating themselves, AK, and the moments where they've kind of thrown the opportunity to seize a series and not seized it and allowed another team back into it. Like, how does that happen? Start with dumb penalties. That's a good way to do it.
Let's welcome in Pierre LeBrun at TSN Hockey Insider, who again said that this is the most playoff-ready Maple Leafs team in the Matthews-Marner era, but the Senators are playing with house money. We could talk him into so many plausible scenarios heading into the Battle of Ontario. Let's see what we can get into. Good evening, Pierre. How are you?
I am good. I am packing my suitcase off to Dallas tomorrow. Very excited that I got the series that I put my number one bid on for the Athletic.
A bid? Is there a bidding system at the Athletic? Is that how it works? You guys put in bids, and that's where they send you?
We communicate. Dave, he knows the drill there over the years at the Star, But of course, it's at least 24/7 at the Star. But I will tell you that I'm pumped about Avalanche and Stars. It's a series I've been eyeing for a couple of months, and it's come together, and I look forward to it, yeah.
So we'll get to that series in a bit, Pierre, but I am curious to know about your thoughts with regards to the Leafs. And you talked about how playoff ready they are, and perhaps the most playoff ready team that we've seen here in a long time for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yeah. Take us through your thought process here.
Yeah, I tweeted that because obviously that's how I feel. Like Craig Berube has, in fact, to me, gotten this team in a place where I believe they're more comfortable in low event games and grindier games. I mean, we'll have to see it, obviously, but I think he's done an excellent job this year transforming that team that way in terms of style of play and simpler plays and, so on and so on. But I also think the way that Brad Treliving has continued to tweak the roster in the last 2 years has made this team more playoff ready too, with especially Chris Tanev. It's funny. I covered Dallas, Colorado last year too. In the second round, they're going to start to think I'm stalking them. But Chris Tanev was unbelievable last year at the playoffs for Dallas. I know a lot of people listening probably didn't watch a lot of Western Conference hockey, but in the first round, he really limited Jack Eichel. In the Vegas series for Dallas in the second round, he was unbelievable against Nathan MacKinnon. Of course, MacKinnon had his moments because he's Nathan MacKinnon, but to watch Tanev up close last year in that series, and I made a point of sometimes just watching his shit and not even watching the puck. I remember thinking, my goodness, this guy's even better than what I've seen on TV when you watch him live in a playoff series when I was a Leaf. And that's why they went out to get him. And so all those things are positive. I truly think the Leafs are more playoff ready than they've ever been in the Matthews-Marner era. I stand by that. However, I heard you had Paul McLean up earlier talking about the Demons. If Ottawa takes game one, I'll bets are off to me because that's the human side of it that is so hard to coach and control. I mean, the original Leafs here of this team only know one thing at playoff time. I mean, I know it's cruel to say, but I don't know how else to put it. Like, that's just what we know with the core of this team. So it seems silly to say this because, good teams overcome game one losses all the time, but I think this one sets the tempo for the Battle of Ontario right from game one.
Well, in that case, Pierre, it's the stakes are as high as they could possibly be on Sunday night, and there's a little bit of intrigue about who might play for the Leafs. As much as I understand you believe in this team and you believe it's a better roster construction than we've seen to date, but the roster construction depends on health here. And we've heard from Craig Berube today that he's fairly confident, I believe is the quote, that Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Jake McCabe, and David Kampf will play. I think the two names. Well, the one name that sticks out as the most important there, obviously, is McCabe, because he is, of course, Tanev's partner on their number one shutdown D-line. What do you know about how would you speculate, decode Leaf injury language for fairly confident when it comes to these guys playing?
Yeah, I think, listen, they're going to obviously want to play, and the question is, one of the reasons he can't come out today on Thursday is because those 3 days matter. From the same way you notice the way Paul Maurice answered the Matthew Tkachuk questions today in Florida. Every day matters at this time of year as far as whether a player is ready. So no one within the Leafs is ready to say either way right now because tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow's another day to check on these guys. So that's the truth. And I know people think that it's, everyone's in playoff mode already and they're not being as forthcoming. Some of that is true, but the reality is because the series doesn't start till Sunday, there's still information to be gained here over the next couple of days, and that's where the Leafs are at with those guys.
TSN hockey insider Pierre LeBrun, our guest. You mentioned you're covering the Dallas-Colorado series. Dallas gets Tyler Seguin back last night, Pierre, but they lose Jason Robertson in the process with a knee injury. What can you tell us about his prognosis?
Yeah, we'll find out more tomorrow. The Stars had the full day off today, so there were no updates on Robertson, but you could tell from how annoyed Pete DeBoer was, the Stars coach post-game last night in his scrum, that he wasn't very happy about it. And it does, it stinks when, the Stars have been playing meaningless games for better part of a week or week and a half ever since it became clear they couldn't catch Winnipeg for first. And you lose guys in meaningless games. It's your worst nightmare in a way, but on the other hand, I go back to, I think it was 1996 when the great Scotty Bowman decided to rest Lidstrom and I think Yzerman at one point. I mean, Detroit was so far ahead of everyone in the conference in their division, they started resting guys late in the regular season. And in hindsight, there was some talk when Detroit didn't win that, well, maybe that hurt them, So I know you guys talked about this earlier about Game 82 for the Leafs, but I don't know that there's a perfect handbook. Like, I think if you're a player who's not 100%, it's a no-brainer to rest and not play in Game 82. But there's also some gain and benefit in playing if you are 100% so that you continue your rhythm and you go into the playoffs feeling good about your game. And especially some of these teams don't start till next week, the way the schedule was announced today. So, I think Florida's going 7 days between the end of the regular season and the start of the playoffs. So it's an eternal debate, but, you just feel for Dallas that, they lose Jason Robertson last night in a completely meaningless game for them.
Yeah, so you're going to be in Dallas Saturday, Pierre. And I mean, like, in a lot of ways, this is the most intriguing series. I mean, we're going to be focused on Leafs Ottawa, and obviously we're always keeping an eye on the 5 Canadian teams, Montreal, Washington, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Edmonton, LA. But when you think about the main storyline or the most intriguing storyline of this NHL season in terms of, transactional trade news, the Rantanen saga is number one by a mile, and it's not close. The idea that now these two teams, Colorado decided to punt on Rantanen, and he spent a little time in Carolina, and now he's in Dallas, and he hasn't really been the same player. He hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been anywhere near the force he was playing alongside Nate McKinnon. How do you see this sort of meeting of, former Stanley Cup champion teammates, McKinnon, Rantanen, Colorado, Dallas?
Well, Dave, that's why I want to be there, man. Like, first of all, these are two of the top 5 teams in the entire league, in my opinion, and they're facing off in the first round. So the playoff format is kind of nutty that way. But the Mikko Rantanen Bowl, for sure. And I remember I interviewed both GMs from Dallas and Colorado the day after the March 7th trade deadline, or sometime that weekend anyway. And that was the piece, was Dallas, Colorado on a collision course, and Mikko Rantanen is now in Dallas. And I asked Chris McFarland, the GM of the Avalanche that day, can you imagine your reaction the day you traded Rantanen to Carolina if someone had told you, well, he'll be in Dallas in the first round of the playoffs and you'll be playing them? he kind of laughed. He goes, you can't. He could have never imagined that Carolina was going to flip him. But that's life. And not only flip him, but Rantanen ends up signing for $12 million a year in Dallas after being offered his last offer from Colorado a few months before that was $11.65 million a year. So not a whole lot of difference other than tax-free in the state of Texas. So I guess take that into consideration. But I will tell you this. I don't know if Mikko Rantanen would ever come out and say this publicly, but I am 100% sure that if Mikko Rantanen truly knew that when Colorado offered him that in, I guess it was in December or January, I forget when he got traded to Carolina, but when he got offered that by Colorado, $11.65 million a year, if he knew that by rejecting that offer he would get traded, I think he would have signed that offer. He was so blindsided by getting traded by Colorado. He was for sure in the mindset that he had till July 1st, just like Mitch Marner, that he could wait and get their best offer and stay in Colorado forever because that's what he wanted. And I think it's one of the reasons he never found his sea legs in Carolina. I just think he didn't know where he was half the time he was there, and then Four Nations came. And then the Dallas opportunity presented itself, and I think he knows the Stars well. He just played them in the playoffs again last year. And I think he figured to himself, I can't really go back to Colorado. This might be, just as good a fit for me. And he signed for 8 years. But it's an incredible backstory. I mean, Rantanen and McKinnon were inseparable forever, both on and off the ice. Now they're facing off in a playoff series. Colorado and Dallas are two of the busiest teams in the entire league, not just at the deadline, but throughout the year and everything they've done. One of them is going home early after all that, and it's the stakes are super high for a first-round series.
TSN hockey insider Pierre LeBrun, our guest in Hour 3 of Overdrive. The Montreal Canadiens punched their ticket last night. They beat Carolina. Excellent record post Four Nations. What type of chance are you giving the Habs of beating the Washington Capitals?
I think a better chance than the Vegas books. I mean, I still think Washington should be favored for obvious reasons, but let me just say this about this league that is like no other for this. 12 months ago, what did you guys think of Washington when they backed into the playoffs as the 8th seed with a minus 37 goal differential? Seriously, what did you guys think of them?
Yeah. I thought kind of similar to what I view Montreal, frankly, even though Montreal's coming in with a much different pedigree as far as their play over the last 20 games.
Sure, and my point is, and listen, I do think, give credit to the Habs. They took advantage of a weak race for 8th. Let's just call it for what it is. Yes. It wasn't the same as the West, but they won out, and they deserve to be there. My point is that we are all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this. Washington's a tremendous story. They've been one of the most aggressive front offices in the league in the last 3 years. The way they've retooled that team on the fly and not bottomed out, it's all positive. Believe me when I tell you, the GMs are taking notes of what Chris Patrick has done there in Washington. But it doesn't change the fact that we're all guilty of looking at a first-place team in real time and thinking, oh, yeah, they've always been. No, this team backed into a playoff spot last year. Now they're better. But how much better are they really? And then maybe they win the cup, and you guys can radio me with this clip. But I think the reality is that somewhere between last year's 8th place team and then adding, Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, Logan Thompson trade, they're obviously way better. Their record tells you that. But are they really 7 spots better 12 months later?
Yeah,
I don't think they are. And so, I think they're a playoff team. I think they're probably, certainly worthy of having a chance to go all the way in the East. But they are beatable. And that's what will give Montreal, a puncher's chance.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Pierre. It's a toss-up for sure. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the way it's fallen off for the Capitals down the stretch here. Obviously, Logan Thompson's injury looms large. The kind of the emotional deflation of going through the incredible high of Ovechkin breaking Gretzky's record, and then a couple of big party nights it looked like for the Capitals, and now the come down has been kind of cruel for them. On the other hand, to your point about Montreal, the puncher's chance, like when you look at this team, like Marty St. Louis never coached in the playoffs. A lot of these guys are essentially playoff neophytes. As much as they're coming in on a high as an unexpected playoff team, do you think they actually have the substance to bring the kind of game you need to bring to win a 7-game series?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there were some red flags over the past week when it took them a number of games to take that final step in. Last weekend they only picked up 1 point over 24 hours in Ottawa and Toronto, and then they lose in a shootout to Chicago at home. And I thought the nerves were really on display that night at the Bell Center, despite the amazing debut of Ivan Demidov. And then last night, I actually thought they came out really nicely against Carolina. That's as good as they've looked in a while, and deserve to win, even though the Hurricanes rested some regulars. You don't know because this team really hasn't been there, so it's sort of the unknown with this group. But and listen, they are way ahead of where they should be. Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon will never admit this publicly, but I don't think they ever saw this as a playoff team this year. I thought they were hoping to take really important steps and knocking at the door, but then next year would be the year. So they're ahead of schedule. They're year 3 of a pretty substantial rebuild, and they're already in the playoffs. So, again, odds are Washington's going to win, but I just tried to answer your first question, which is Washington beatable? And the answer is yes in my mind.
Pierre, I did a list in the 4 o'clock hour about the players on Canadian teams that have the most to gain heading into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I had 2 Winnipeg Jets in my top 5. Of course, Connor Hellebuck, who's a total no-brainer, but also Mark Scheifele. How are you feeling about Winnipeg's playoff chances, considering they won the President's Trophy? Everything seems to be trending in a very positive direction for them, but they've got a very difficult first-round opponent.
Well, it's funny. You can link it back to our Washington discussion in some ways, but isn't it funny that now I haven't looked at every publication and everyone's picks yet, but from what I can gather so far, I haven't seen a whole lot of Winnipeg Washington out there as a Stanley Cup final, and they're by far the best teams in each other's conference. And so we've covered Washington. Where does that come from on Winnipeg? Like, why is Vegas seemingly a more popular pick, or a return from Edmonton if they get their act together, or the winner of Dallas, Colorado? It seems like people just want to overlook the Jets, and I think it starts with what we saw 12 months ago. I mean, the Jets got destroyed by Colorado in the first round, and some of that was Connor Hellebuck's play, but I think that has put some people in a position where, despite an amazing regular season, where the Jets really went wire to wire and almost barely showed any signs of slowing down throughout the year, people are like, yeah, but now it's the real hockey. And, there's an argument to be made that the Jets have a bit of Leafs West in them, and that since their ride to the 2018 Western Conference Final, which I really enjoyed covering, the fans in Winnipeg are unreal, the Jets haven't done much in the playoffs since then. That's a pretty long chunk of time. Losing last year as the favorite in the first round to Colorado, losing to Montreal in the bubble in 21. Like, this is a really good team that since 2018 has not gone deep. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on them, to be honest. And it certainly starts with Hellebuck. Your point on Scheifele would be this to me. He was by far, in my estimation, the biggest snub of Team Canada's Four Nations team when they announced their team on December 2nd this year. Just based on his production, his consistency. And it's almost like, is he paying the price because Winnipeg hasn't, answered the bell at this time of year? Who knows? But I agree with you, Aaron, that a big, deep playoff for the Jets, it helps guys like Hellebuck and Scheifele and their perception around the league. But I'll tell you this, we're asked by the PHWA not to divulge our ballots because we don't want to influence other voters who haven't voted yet. But Connor Hellebuck figures pretty prominently on my Hart Trophy ballot.
When you say pretty prominently, I can guess where you're leaning, Pierre.
Wink, wink.
Corrado already revealed he took Draisaitl.
Corrado broke the rules, by the way. Corrado's
Yeah.
telling us who he voted for. I've been saying I'm undecided. I've still yet to vote, Pierre. So I'm following the protocols. Thank you very much.
There you go. I don't think it's a slam dunk year. I think that's what's great about the Hart debate this year is legitimately there's some great cases. I think between Draisaitl, McKinnon, Hellebuck, Jack Eichel, how about Cale Makar? Because defensemen never get to win the award. Chris Pronger is the last defenseman to win the Hart Trophy.
Yeah.
Nick Lidstrom won 7 Norris trophies and is considered a top 5 defenseman of all time, I think, by most, and never won a Hart.
Blame the hockey writers, Pierre. We're
I know.
Blame the hockey writers.
Well,
Yeah.
Pierre, safe travels out to Dallas. We know you love the Cowboys, and I'm certain you'll love covering the Stars in the Avalanche series. Thank you for doing this. We'll talk to you again soon.
And I should have mentioned Kucherov, another good Hart candidate. All right. See you guys.
Thank you. That is-
Draisaitl, too.
Yeah.
Let's throw it out there.
Pierre LeBrun, TSN Hockey Insider. Pretty good gig covering Dallas, Colorado, Denver, Dallas, 2 great cities, and the level of skill between those 2 teams is almost unprecedented. I think you could argue they're the 2 most talented teams, maybe not the 2 best teams. And even though Heiskanen probably won't be ready to start the series for Dallas, we don't expect Jason Robertson to be ready to start this series for Dallas. They're still absolutely loaded on both sides. That's going to be so fun to watch.
It's fascinating stuff. It really is. It's just tremendous. And I mean, the Rantanen thing to me is fascinating because
Sure.
like you look at his career stats in the playoffs, he's right up there in the top 10 in terms of career playoff points per game.
I believe he's sandwiched between Mike Bossy and Mark Messier.
Yeah.
Career playoff points per game. That's how incredible he's been in the postseason.
That's how incredible he's
been. That's why he, in large part, why he got paid. I mean, it's not a coincidence. Certainly Dallas is looking at the body of work and what he's done alongside McKinnon, without McKinnon in the regular season, but it's not a coincidence that Dallas is like, all right, we're getting one of the preeminent playoff performers in the history of the sport on our team in this trade.
Yeah. No, but the question is this like a Juan Soto situation where, if they don't play the way they want to play and he does not perform the way he wants to perform, is he sitting there saying, hey, it's not the same as, playing behind Aaron Judge. It's not the same, right now I think he's been playing with Wyatt Johnston, a great Johnston, yeah.
Yes.
A great Toronto kid who I watched play minor hockey many times. Wyatt's a great player, but he ain't Nate McKinnon. Rupe Hintz is a good centerman, but he ain't Nate McKinnon. You wonder, like, can Rantanen do it? I think that's one of the great questions of this series. Can Rantanen do it without McKinnon? And can he do it to McKinnon?
Well, that's exactly what he's going to have to do. It's going to be an incredible series. That starts on Sunday. Of course, the Leafs also start Sunday. They'll take on the Ottawa Senators in the Battle of Ontario, which is official 7 p.m. puck drop on Sunday evening. TSN 1050 has games 2, 4, and 6. We also have tickets to give away for Leaf playoff home games here on the station. We'll fill you in on how to win those as OverDrive continues on TSN 2 and TSN 1050. Hour 3 continues. It is Thursday evening. Aaron Korolnek, Dave Feschuk from the Toronto Star filling in for Hayes, the O-Dog, and Noodles. And we've got the debut of the Feschuk Five coming up momentarily. Should tell you first, TSN 1050 is giving away tickets to every Maple Leaf playoff home game. And all you have to do is listen to TSN 1050 on the iHeartRadio app for your chance to win them. To enter, download the iHeartRadio app. Create an account and listen to TSN 1050 for at least 15 minutes straight. You can enter twice per day, so listen to First Up between 6 and 10 a.m. and OverDrive between 4 and 7. The more times you listen, the better chances of winning. And there's not much better of a ticket you could win than a Maple Leaf playoff ticket, which is a hot commodity, needless to say.
Very hot in both arenas.
Yes. Which I kind of view them as Maple Leaf tickets in Ottawa as well. Sorry, Ottawa fans, but clearly Leaf fans are doing their best to get in the building, and I think they'll be very successful. Very successful.
It's like former Ottawa Senators coach and former Maple Leafs assistant coach Paul McLean said on the show earlier, if you don't want so many Leaf fans in the building, buy the tickets.
That's exactly it. And the season ticket holders don't sell the tickets, maybe more appropriately. And clearly in Toronto on Sunday night, it's going to be an electric atmosphere. The O-Dogs thought earlier, I think it's a great thought. You have Gary Roberts and
Darcy
Domi and
Tucker.
Darcy Tucker out there waving towels, getting the fans fired up. Maybe the fans in the lower bowl will emerge from their sushi or steak consumption and taking the festivities as well. So
I doubt that.
as well. But maybe you never know. That's what you have to hope for if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, take the sushi to go. Take
Sushi to go.
Take the Chardonnay and the sushi to go.
So all show long, we've been talking about the Feschuk Five, a brand new idea come up with by producer Cam, and the notion behind the Feschuk Five is simple. It is the 5 teams that reside in Canada that qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. You are going to rank them, starting at number 5 with the least chance to win the Stanley Cup to number 1, the team with the best chance to win the Stanley Cup. Dave Feschuk, are you ready to present the Feschuk Five?
Oh, never been readier.
Give us number 5. The team with the worst chance, if you want to say it, to win the Cup coming out of Canada.
Okay. Well, it's very clear to me that the 5th best Canadian team is Montreal. I mean, they are the youngest team, I believe. I've read this. I haven't verified it myself, but I've been told they're the youngest team to ever make the NHL playoffs. And that is not an asset in the NHL playoffs, right? To me, experience means a lot, both negative and positive. Losing the playoffs can help you. Winning the playoffs obviously can bolster confidence. These guys just haven't been in the playoffs. Marty St. Louis never coached in the playoffs. They barely snuck into the playoffs, as Mr. LeBrun was pointing out earlier in the show. Had a hard time, had a few hiccups in clinching. That concerns me. All those things concern me, as does the matchup against a team that challenged for the President's Trophy.
See, that's where I would push back in that I think you could make a case, and my co-host on First Up, Carlo Koliakovo, has made the case in favor of Montreal potentially going on a decent playoff run in that they have to go through the Metro. If they get past Washington, they're going to get the winner of New Jersey and Carolina, and I think Carolina will win that series. I think they're the superior team, even though Dougie Hamilton back for the Devils. Still no Jack Hughes, who's their best player by a mile. And missing him is going to be very consequential for New Jersey. But I'd still rather play Carolina than Tampa or Florida. That's for sure coming out of the Eastern Conference, which is what the winner of Toronto or Ottawa has to do. So I think you could maybe make a case that Montreal's path is, I'm not going to say easier, but maybe preferential to that of those coming out of the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, you can make the case. We're not talking about path, though. We're talking about team.
True.
And they are the weakest team.
All right, give me number 4.
4 is Ottawa. And look, Ottawa's going to have something to say about this because, I'm obviously ranking them below the Leafs. To me, they're a team that they've probably been in this sort of unfulfilled potential mode. There's been a lot of young guys in this team that have been paid big money to perform that haven't performed. They finally have got it together this season, but I think that brings enormous pressure. And the fact that, you're 25 years old, Brady Tkachuk, and
you're pointing at me being 25 years old. I wish.
The fact that you're 25 years old, Doogie's birthday.
Doogie's in that.
Doogie's in that range.
Lucky man.
But I think Brady Tkachuk is older than Doogie, who's celebrating his birthday today and took the day off to do so, as the O-Dog rightly pointed out. You're that old and you're making your playoff debut. Like, it's in some ways that could be good. Like, yeah, he's not scared. We know Brady Tkachuk is not going to be scared to play in the playoffs. We know he's probably going to be a good fit to play in the playoffs. But I don't know, man. Like, these guys are kind of like, it feels like they're late to the party.
They feel like the 2017 Leafs in some respect, where, again, no one necessarily had the utmost of expectations for what that team was going to do back in 2017. And they got a matchup against Washington, who was a really good team at the time, a veteran team. And Leafs were taking Washington to overtime, seemingly night after night. Everybody remembers that incredible behind-the-back pass from Brian Boyle to Kasperi Kapanen. I think that was in Game 2, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps Game 3.
Yeah, they went up 2-1.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was in Game 3. And sometimes when you're this young upstart with no demons, and seemingly that's been the theme of the show today, talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and the demons that hide underneath their beds at night. That's what Paul McLean, their former assistant coach, had to say earlier on the show this afternoon. So, yeah, for Ottawa, they're kind of playing with house money in many respects, right? And people will point to David Perron and Claude Giroux and Nick Cousins and Michael Amadio. Yeah, but those are, I'm not going to say bit players. Claude Giroux, certainly not. But all of their best players, Tkachuk and Stützle and Cousins and Batherson, Jake Sanderson, Thomas Chabot, Greg. I mean, it's a long list of guys who have never been in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Maybe that's a good thing. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs in 2017, again, they came close to beating a team in Washington that they really had no business beating, depending on how you view it. Again, a lot of overtime games, but they didn't. And that's what I think the Maple Leaf fans have to be hoping for. All right, this experience that has been built up over these 9 playoff runs, if you want to call them that, is a positive as opposed to a negative. Meanwhile, for Ottawa, there's nothing to look at because it's all fresh. It's all new.
That's fair, but I do think ultimately the lack of experience is a liability. I can't go away from that.
I'd rather have experience, the idea that, good or bad, than none.
The idea that the Leafs could beat themselves is very plausible, but that has nothing to do with the Senators, okay?
Yes. All right, number 3 on the Feschuk Five best teams in Canada, or I guess the third best team in Canada, is coming up. Go ahead.
Well, 3 is the team that Paul McLean, former Leaf assistant coach, talked about. They're going to go to bed tonight after playing Game 82, and what's going to crawl out from under their beds, according to Paul McLean, who's coached these guys, but some demons. The demons of playoff failures past that have haunted them for most of a decade here in the Shanaplan era. The Leafs are my third team here because, again, they should be higher. They've got talent that suggests they should be higher. They've got, stats that suggest they should be higher. They got goaltending that suggests they should be higher. And the goaltending might be the factor that brings them higher at the end of all this. But until you do it, you're a suspect in every way. And this team is still a suspect. You cannot not be suspicious about what might befall this team. You want to believe they can do it, just like you wanted to believe Rory McIlroy could get over his demons and win the Masters. Maybe they'll follow that trend. Maybe they'll look up Bob Rotella, the great sports psychologist, and get him on speed dial. I don't know what will be the factor that actually delivers on the promise that this team has had for so long, but they haven't yet. They're my third team.
Stolars, Ekman Larson, McCabe, Tanev, Craig Berube, the emergence of Matthew Nyes. I think there's a ton of reasons why you should expect things to be different for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But we were having conversations with people in the hall before the show began, talking about the Leafs and why things can be different. But in many respects, their best players remain the same. Their core players, the guys that they need to perform in these big moments. We've seen how they've performed in those moments in the past. We're going to find out as early as Sunday night at 7 o'clock if it will be different. Number 2 on the Feschuk Five.
Well, number 2, Pierre LeBrun called them Leafs West, the Winnipeg Jets.
Oh,
and I apologize to all my Manitoba family. I do apologize for linking the Jets to the Leafs. I know there would be a lot of resentment around that if I happen to do that at a prairie barbecue this summer. But we'll see how it goes. The difference is, though, for me, AK, with why I put the Jets ahead of the Leafs, is because at least they have a memory, albeit a distant memory, of winning something. Like they got to a conference final in 2018. That matters to me. You talked about the pressure on Scheifele, who was, obviously, who's been a part of a lot of the failures since 2018 in the playoffs, who was a snub from Team Canada. You talk about Hellebuck, how he's been 2-8 as a goaltender with a .875 save percentage in the past 2 playoffs, in both obviously first round exits these past 2 years. That's some baggage, but at least they have something the Leafs don't have. They at least have the memory of a playoff run, the guys that matter on that team or matter most on that team. So I think, they've got a lot to prove, and they've got their own demons out on the prairie, but the Jets are my second-ranked team.
So number 5 was Montreal, number 4 was Ottawa, number 3 was Toronto, number 2 was Winnipeg. So number 1, by default, I can do math here, Dave, is the Edmonton Oilers, the only remaining team that we have not mentioned. Why are they the best Canadian team in your opinion?
Well, people would point out they haven't been the best Canadian team this season. But to me, I'm not going to put too much stock in the hiccups of the regular season that the Edmonton Oilers have endured. I'm not going to put too much stock in Connor McDavid not being the particularly dominant Connor McDavid that we're used to. Because guess what? I believe McDavid can flip a switch, can become that guy. And they got another guy that is in the conversation for the Hart Trophy, and Leon Draisaitl, who happens to, while Connor McDavid resides at number 3 all-time in playoffs, points per game, career. Draisaitl's 5th. I mean, we're talking about a list that it begins with Wayne Gretzky at number 1, Mario Lemieux number 2, McDavid 3, Barry Pedersen 4, Leon Draisaitl 5. So I'm going to roll with those guys. You know, they've done it in the playoffs. They got to a final last year. We know about the story of the nearly miraculous comeback against the Panthers. And it is, I do think the Stanley Cup run fatigue can be a factor here. But look, man, these guys realize these chances don't come up very often. They're ending, if they're not at the end of their primes, they're coming close. I would have to believe that guys that are this good understand the essence and the sort of urgency of this moment. And if I had to bet on one of these 5 Canadian teams to break the circa 1993 drought, I'd only bet on the Oilers.
See, it's funny. I would have the Leafs at number 1. I would, and that's not Homer Aaron speaking. I think that's purely a byproduct of the Eastern Conference relative to the Western Conference. There's a massive spread between the two conferences as far as quality of the teams.
That doesn't mean the teams are better.
That is true. That is true.
We're talking about the best teams.
But if you're talking about winning a Stanley Cup, like for Winnipeg to win a Stanley Cup, think about the gauntlet that they'll have to go through.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, someone's going to do it, whether it's Dallas or Colorado or Vegas or Edmonton or LA or Winnipeg, whoever it might be, St. Louis, Minnesota, we'll have to wait and find out. But you're going to have to beat 2 of the top 5 teams in the NHL to get to the Cup final. In the case of the Eastern Conference, I mean, are we sure Florida is still at the top of their game? I mean, Matthew Tkachuk hasn't played in months. Sam Bennett's been sitting out for games. Aaron Ekblad was suspended. He's coming back in game number 3. I mean, there are some question marks with the Florida Panthers. Tampa, I mean, for Toronto, I mean, they've owned the Lightning over the last couple of years. That's indisputable. I mean, Vasilevsky's numbers against the Leafs are terrible. Over
He's a different guy this season.
Maybe he is, but I mean, we saw it pretty recently. Leafs put up 4 on them, and the Leafs have put up, I believe, 5 and 4 against Tampa this season. So they have continued to do their thing against the Lightning. I think the path, not to say that the Leafs will win the Stanley Cup, but the Western Conference, you have a tough time selling me on a team coming out of there simply because of how difficult it is to get through.
That's been the case for a while, and Edmonton did it last year, right?
They did.
So, look,
with Ekholm, with everybody healthy, there's still some question marks. And I know Connor McDavid doesn't want to hear about Edmonton being the walking wounded. It says they're healthy, and they have the 2 best players. If there's a draft of players to start a playoff run, it goes McDavid 1 and Draisaitl 2 every single time.
Yeah.
Maybe you could argue for Hellebuck, but again, the playoff resume is not exactly sparkling.
No, I mean, you make a lot of great points. I think it's kind of ignoring history to start looking at the Maple Leafs' path as the reason they might make it, because
that's fair.
They've had some paths, AK.
They've had some incredible paths.
They've had some really, really well, blazed paths.
Yes,
very
much so.
Clear paths, smooth sailing paths.
Snowplow has just cleared the way for
That's what I mean. So we've talked about easy paths in the history of this iteration of the team, the Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares team. So I have a hard time going back to path as the reason they're going to make it happen when they had paths before. So that's going to be on them. They've got to, the Leafs have to make sure they don't beat themselves. Let's be honest here. And they haven't shown they can do that.
Excellent job on the Feschuk Five. I think both the Feschuk Five and AK's list, major successes.
Going to get us kicked off the show, but we had fun.
Absolutely not. I think very good stuff. Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs for the Leafs Sunday night at 7 o'clock down at Scotiabank Arena. Game 82 tonight down at Scotiabank Arena. The Maple Leafs and the Red Wings. You can watch it on TSN 4. Our final segment, my FanDuel Best Bets, and we'll wrap up a very busy week here on OverDrive. TSN 2, TSN 1050. All right, it's time now for today's best bets. They are powered by FanDuel. Make your picks and assemble a same-game parlay in seconds on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. I'm looking at the playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs. By the way, they're not the NHL playoffs, people. That's not what they're called. They're called the Stanley Cup playoffs. Very important to me to be accurate. As a writer, I'm sure you agree with me.
Well, it's the greatest trophy in sports.
It is indeed. Here's the parlay I'm putting together. The Montreal Canadiens plus a game and a half against the Washington Capitals. Meaning they either win or lose in 7 and I cash the bet. So that's plus money. Going to stick that in the parlay. Carolina over Jersey. I think that's an easy one. I think Jersey just has too much attrition. I like Carolina in that series. Matthew Nyes, 2+ goals in the series for the Leafs against the Ottawa Senators. This guy has shown a penchant for scoring in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I have a hunch he's going to be a big-time performer for the Toronto Maple Leafs against the Senators. Today's best bets, powered by FanDuel. Live same-game parlays are now available for every NHL game on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Please play responsibly, 18+, and physically located in Ontario. So, final night of the regular season tonight. We're almost there. Playoffs on Saturday. It's going to be absolutely sensational. I think we all just need to hope and cross our fingers that no more notable players suffer injuries. Again, we saw that in Dallas last night with Robertson. Hopefully everybody emerges unscathed tonight and we get rocking and rolling on Saturday. And for the Leafs on Sunday night.
It's going to be a fun one, man. And look, if your parlay, one of the legs of your parlay there, then Matthew Nye's leg comes true, be a very good sign for the Maple Leafs, right?
I almost took 3+ goals for Matthew.
Yeah, well, he got 2 in the series last year against Boston, and they didn't win, so maybe he does need 3. They needed one more goal.
They needed one more against Boston, and who knows where we'd be now. But needless to say, Matthew Nye is a huge part of the Toronto Maple Leafs. First line, first power play, and he scored 29 goals in the regular season at this point, looking for number 30 tonight.
Well, when you think about how they had success when they beat Tampa a couple years back, right? How did they do it? They got in front of the net, and Nyes can supply that physical presence in front of the net. Pacioretty, if he's going to be healthy, I think they can lean on him to do that. They got to get those tips. They got to be nuisances in front of Linus Ullmark because that's where the goals are scored, man. And I think if you look at why the Leafs haven't scored in their most recent couple of playoff series, two or fewer goals in 13 of the last 14 playoff games, there you go.
Want to thank Cam, want to thank JP, want to thank Joe from the Bridge. Thank our audience, most importantly, for the last 3 hours. Hope everybody has a terrific Easter weekend. Good Friday tomorrow, Easter Monday coming up on Monday, and certainly be a ton of Leaf talk over the weekend and an overdrive on Monday. And until then, we'll chat then.